All right, hello everybody. I am going to, I don't know how long this one today is going to be because I'm going to try and cover a lot, but I think this is going to be the last one for the semester, at least at this point. Um, Unless you guys ask for something, but we're starting to run out of time here. I'm wearing my sexy hat because I took a shower before bed last night and I look crazy. So, last time we talked about postmodernism and uh, and I was going to do a follow up on that one, and maybe I can squeeze one in after this. But the thing that was important about postmodernism that I wanted us to get was that um, even though as a theory it's been mostly discredited by as an art movement, it came and went. As social theory, it didn't really solve any sort of problems. Uh, and so people stopped talking about it 25 years ago. Nevertheless, the world we're living in feels very postmodern in a lot of different ways. Um, there were elements we didn't talk about. We didn't talk about identity, but the focus on individual identity that we have right now fits very well into the postmodern analysis, not the least of which is because, once you have the collapse of grand narrative, individual identity starts to become more important. If I'm a writer and I want to write a story, and in my story is a black female character, I'm going to have to try and project to understand her world in such a way as to write that character fairly well. It wouldn't be surprising if any of my, I don't know if you've noticed, but I'm a middle-aged white guy. It wouldn't be surprising if any of my readers read the character and said, "This doesn't sound like anybody I know. This this man clearly has no idea what he's talking about in writing this character, and maybe he shouldn't be writing characters like this. At the very least, I don't have to read him." And there's clearly some truth to that, right? I wouldn't expect to be able to write that character well, and I wouldn't be surprised at all if my African American audience wasn't actually my audience. They want to go read something else that lines up with their experience better. So great, right? No problem. So they can go read stuff written by black authors. That's great, except at some point you get to, and you see this in sociology, right? You go back to the mid-century sociologists, and or anthropologists, or even psychologists, there's an awful lot of projection. People just kind of assumed that what they were writing was true for everybody, and coming out of the civil rights era, right? You end up with folks saying, "Oh, this isn't really the case," which is part of why we had the focused theories that we talked about before. A focus on race studies in sociology makes sense if, in a world where people are trying to capture experience that previously has been glossed over or ignored, not even acknowledged. And so in that world, there's room for black sociologists to write black sociology. That's not what you would call it. And people are going to read it and they're going to like it, right? You definitely have authors or artists across all sorts of genres doing stuff that's tailored to their particular race or ethnic group or gender. And in and of itself, that's absolutely fine. In a world, however, in the world we're in now, you kind of get to a point where you get to this troubling point where I probably shouldn't write about write something fictional from a Native American's perspective. Maybe I shouldn't even be writing sociology from a Native American perspective, because that's just not who I am, and clearly an Indian scholar is going to do much better than I am at addressing whatever issues it is we're talking about. When you go too far down that path, however, you get to a place where, and this is going to sound familiar, people really shouldn't write about folks that they are themselves not, right? And folks kind of don't have to read stuff that's not in their purview. And that's a little bit problematic. So, and why do I say that? Because even though I'm a middle-aged white guy, and even though I might do a bad job of it, trying to place myself in the shoes of a black woman in America, or of, a Native American living on the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota, that requires a leap of empathy and hopefully some humility, but definitely a leap of empathy. I can try and understand what their world is like, and that is going to take me out of my world, hopefully long enough to make me a little bit of a better person. And the real danger with all of that is that you end up in your little box studying what your area of expertise is, reading other authors who are the authors that are in your area of expertise, and you stop crossing over. If I'm not writing queer theory, sociology, does someone in that area need to read what I'm writing? And not because what I'm writing is special. In fact, I barely write, so it's not special. And that's, we stop losing this, this working together. And not working together, but we just start to lose the between group connections. And you see that nowadays. I've covered this a dozen times throughout the course, but in a world where the Fox News people watch Fox News and the MSNBC people watch MSNBC News, and the Fox News people all quit Facebook and go to Telegram, and the MSNBC people all quit Telegram and go to, I don't know, Discord or Blue Sky or whatever. They don't quit Telegram, they quit Facebook and go to, then our world gets smaller and smaller and smaller, and we lose whatever common thread we have. And all of that's to say, if you take postmodernism as an idea to its end point, yes, you get rid of the grand narrative that oversteps what it can say about people and things, but you go far enough down the road and you end up with people who don't need to or want to talk to each other at all, and that's not great. But you can also see how in that world identity comes to be first and foremost. In order to teach this class, I have to say to you, I'm an average white guy, which means I'm coming from this perspective. I'm not a native Southerner. I've only lived here for 12 years. I'll probably never be a Southerner, right? And all of that says something about who I am and where I'm from. Whereas, really, in order to teach sociology, the question should be, do you have a PhD in this stuff? have you read this stuff? Have you taught this stuff? And the answer is yes, 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 right? But, well, no, so there you go. Anyway, and you see, so you see the elements of that identity politics starting in postmodernism, but now it's like all throughout, not just, it's all throughout our politics, and it's in our social theory. Another element to postmodernism we didn't talk about, and maybe this is the postmodern one, and I'll just have to do the wrap-up one next. The next element is space and time. And I find this just wild because the postmodernists they were writing honestly before the internet was even a thing. But they looked at the accelerating technologies of communication and transportation and the way we were building, so that there was a geographic element to this. Geographic. And we're kind of like, well, okay, so 100 years ago, it would have taken. Well, when the settlers were trying to make it across the United States, it would take 3 months for their wagons for them to walk, and their wagons, from the east all the way to the west, and then there were trains which could do it in a few days, and now there are planes you can get to California in 5 hours, and it seems like a long plane flight, and it kind of is, but compared to where we're coming from, that's nothing at all. It's like tiny little piece of time. And then with communication, they could see that communication was getting faster, cheaper, easier, and the information world was collapsing to such a point where you really could, it seemed like in 1988, 1990, that you could really see about what you wanted from around the world pretty easily. And through the 90s is when postmodernism died, and ironically that's also when the internet came up and completely obliterated any sort of barriers to communication that we had. It's wild. So they kind of, I don't know if they would have foreseen the internet and what it could do. But I was just texting a young friend of mine in New Zealand, and it didn't cost me anything. Whereas when I went away to college in 1980 something, and I wanted to call home, it would be $5 just to call my mom on the telephone, which is a little bit crazy. So the space and time being collapsed to a point of not actually mattering, it was a very postmodern kind of thing too. And back then was the very first internet dating, the very first bulletin boards, the idea that you might know someone that you didn't actually know in person was a little bit out there, but you could see it coming. And now people live their entire lives on screens, to the point where we've got an in-person loneliness epidemic. That's a little wild. Okay, so when we look at the world we're living in now, right? We've got what we talked about objective truths. We talked about science and logic. We talked about progress, and postmodernism. No one wants to talk about postmodernism, but we have trouble figuring out what objective truth there actually is, right? We don't, if you live in your red bubble, you're red. If you live in your blue bubble, you're blue. If you're a churchgoer, you live in a world of church and religion. If you're an atheist, you live in a different world. It's not that church world. And So we're having trouble with objective truth. We've also grown to really distrust science and logic. Um, there's been a revolt almost against the scientific establishment, especially coming out of COVID. And it's worth pointing out, of course, that science as an establishment, of course, can always be wrong. Like, you don't have to do what the science people say just because they're science people. But science is just a process, right? It's a process of trying to figure out what it is we think we know. And in arguing about, whether or not you should get a COVID vaccine, or whether or not raw milk is good for you or bad for you, we've sort of thrown the baby out with the bathwater, because the whole point of science is that we can test and figure something out, right? And we can agree that on what we see, right? And it actually goes with the previous point I was making about religion. Um, you can talk about the truth of your religion, right? And by that you mean it's true, the way everybody means something is true. It's capital TRUE, true. It is a thing. But if I'm a different religion, I think you're wrong, right? And so where the truth is theirs, you're not going to have any sort of answer to. Those are unanswerable questions fundamentally, which is why they call it faith. In fact, if you're trying to prove that your religion is true, you're kind of missing the point of faith, but that's a whole different conversation. But if I take a watermelon or a bag of watermelons, and you and I go outside and we drop them from 10 feet and they break, we're going to agree that watermelons are soft, concrete is hard, and they're going to break when you drop them, right? That's objective truth. I see it, I agree on what I saw. You see it, you agree on what you saw. We saw the same thing. That's objective truth. That's what science is, testing and trying to figure it out. And we've kind of moved away from that. And yes, so, but then how do you know the objective truth if you don't trust science to try and help you figure that out? And in the same vein, we kind of have lost our view of progress. We're not sure where we're going. We're not sure what the future holds. We don't trust that things are getting better. About the only thing that we can agree on is that things are different. And even the recent political reds, they don't say make the future great. They say make America great again. It's almost we got to go backwards to get better. I don't know what you do with that. It's just so you see that we've all of these modern things, truth, science and logic, progress, building into those, that we understand through those grand narratives, they're gone. And now we are in a world that's kind of topsy-turvy, because what do we do with that? How do we figure that out? I don't know. All right. I'm not sure how to edit these, so this one actually, I'm gonna cut this one here because I don't want to mix everything up. So this is actually the Pomo follow-up, and it's a short one. Okay, and I'll see you in a minute for the next one.